Hi, I'm Jeff York. I'll call this meeting of the Jericho Development Review Board to order. We will first read the agenda and talk about some rules and then swear folks in, and then we can get to the items. So we have one item of new business, which is a request for the DRB from GW Tatro Old Mill Properties for a final plat review for a major subdivision site plan review for phase one of the proposed subdivision. This property is located at 366 Vermont Route 15, in the Village Center and Character-Based Zoning District. And then we have an item to approve the minutes for January 10th, adjourn the public meeting, and go into deliberative session. Just one item of clarification there, Chris. We're going to talk separately about the subdivision and the site plan review.
Yeah, so
there's that to everybody.
So there's two warrant items in front of the board tonight, so there'll be two different actions taken. There'll be one on the subdivision of the project, which is the entire 15 acres, and then we're doing a site plan review on the phase one, which is approximately 20 lots, and it's around the existing mill building. And the site plan review basically is well, there's two different sets of staff notes. So each appropriate section of the regulations are talked in those. So the staff notes you want first are basically the ones that have in bold print the final plat review, and the presenter will present those things. So the idea will be after we get through the subdivision is the board will close that hearing, and then they'll go to reopen the site plan review, and that will get closed.
Okay.
Any questions or everybody with that?
Going to go over that for a minute. Thank you.
Yep.
So these proceedings will be conducted in an orderly manner consistent with the DRB's rules of procedure. Written copies of the rules of procedure are available, but we'll walk you through the process. You don't need a copy to participate. First item as Brainy is to ask the board for any disclosure of any conflict of interest or ex parte communication with board members. Any ex parte?
Nope.
Yeah.
No.
I was copied on an email from the town where people were offering some opinions, but I don't feel that there was no decision made. There was no bequest for any kind of change in process. It was probably inappropriate that I saw the comments, so that just I'll point that out. And then I'll give you the information on interested persons. Interested persons are those who under Vermont law have the right to appeal an act or decision of the Jericho Zoning Administration or the DRB. These may include the applicant, or if the applicant does not own the property, the person owning title to the property. A person owning or occupying property in the immediate neighborhood of a property that is the subject of any zoning decision or act, who can demonstrate a physical or environmental impact on the person's interest under the criteria reviewed, and who alleges that the decision or act if confirmed will violate the municipal plan or bylaw. And the last group of interested persons would be any 10 persons, either voters or landowners, who by signed petition to the DRB allege that the decision or act if confirmed will violate the municipal plan or bylaw. Petitioners must designate one person to serve as their representative. Many people of the public may be interested in a zoning permit application, but only statutorily defined interested persons, those three which I just mentioned, may appeal a decision of a zoning officer or DRB. If an interested person fails to make a timely appeal, they are bound by that decision. Interested persons must participate in the hearing to protect the appeal rights. Only those interested persons who have participated in a DRB proceeding may appeal a decision re-entered in that proceeding in environmental court. Pursuant to statute, participation consists of offering through oral or written testimony, evidence, or a statement of concern related to the subject of the proceeding. If there is to be an appeal of the work we do tonight, the DRB does not determine who an interested person is. That is part of the appeal process. But we do need to establish who participated in the hearing. To help with that, we have two things. Please sign in on the sign-in sheets, or if you are participating by video, provide your contact information in the meeting chat or by email to the zoning administrator. Secondly, when you speak in the hearing, please tell us your name loud and clear. so that we can record it in the minutes. Thank you. We will get on and, if you'd like to come up and present. Mr. Chair, there's two parts here.
I assume we want to start with this plan.
Yeah, which is actually the old version. We should be working off the latest version of that. But my name is Richard Hamlin. I'm a professional engineer. I'm here representing the applicant who is with us on Zoom, Mr. Tatro, who is the representative of the Old Mill Properties LLC property. As was mentioned, there's two sets of applications before you, the subdivision and of the entire parcel, and then the view of site plan approval for essentially the phase one project. And I'll fully describe that. The plans that will be presented tonight, all of the plans for both the site plan and the subdivision are all in the same set. I discussed this with Mr. Flynn, and he thought it'd be better because there's so many duplicates to just combine them all into one set. And so we'll work our way through those this evening. Yeah, that's a good place to start. So obviously, Mr. Flynn has put together many comments about both the applications. I think what I'll do is go through and focus on just kind of some of the key comments, and then if there are questions, we can delve into some of the other details as we do the review. But as was mentioned, it's almost 16-acre parcel right in the center core, and was formerly the sawmill property in terms of where we are located. Two existing buildings on the parcel, the old mill building and the sawdust building. Those are depicted right here and right there. So those buildings exist now. All the other buildings that were there have been removed. All right. So the preliminary approval conditions required essentially two pieces of information to be provided. One was the traffic study, the other was all the legal documents. Both of those assemblies have been submitted and are before you in the application package. And the other request or condition was that all of the roadways, all of the armature essentially of the development for phase 1, 2, and future phases be designed. Even though site plan would only be the center core phase 1, but for the subdivision that we show all the road geometry, all of the lots, and a potential subdivision of those lots in compliance with the town standards, which essentially focuses on chapter 13 of the rules. And so everything you see this evening is essentially tailored to chapter 13. And so this is the general layout of the subdivision. All of the roads, all of the lots, all conform to chapter 13. Mr. Flynn has pointed out that the existing parcel which is T1, if we look at this parcel, so that parcel is bounded here. Yeah, thank you. So T1 is here, and it encompasses the parking lot, which we'll see later, this building and the sawdust building. And there was some question about the configuration. The chapter 13 requires on the frontage side, the primary frontage sides, that a lot not be greater than 70 feet wide. Here's our primary frontage, which is greater than 70 feet. Mr. Flynn suggested that we request a waiver, but I believe this very situation is covered under 13.1.3.5. That's on page 164 of the regulations. And I can just read that. It's probably easier to do. And this is 13.1.3.5, supplemental as to existing structures. In addition to adaptive use of existing structures under section 7.2, adaptive use of existing structures, and non-conforming buildings under section 7.3.2, non-conforming structures, an existing building may be reskinned and or redeveloped, provided that thereafter it complies with the private frontage and building placement standard under this Article 13. And so the rules were written specific to address this situation where you have an existing building. And as long as the building setting meets the requirements of setback and presentation on the street, so that's the private frontage piece, and the building placement where it lies on the property, an exemption isn't required because this is permitted. And so the type of frontage and how this building is located on the lot does meet these requirements. So we believe that under that section 13.1.3.5, a waiver is not required. And Mr. Flynn and I discussed this and said we'd discuss it with you. And if you agree with 13.1.3.5, we can move on. If not, we can discuss the waiver requirement. But again, the thing to note here is private frontage. The term here under chapter 13 is different than frontage, lot frontage. So under chapter 13, frontage talks about how the building essentially faces the street. Is it a porch frontage? Is it a setback frontage? And there are examples of the different types of frontages starting on page 191. Is it a common yard frontage? Is it a porch frontage, shop front, and so forth? And in this particular case, we are a porch style frontage. So that's that term. Then also was a discussion about the green. And so that's this area here, which is, as we'll see a little later as we move through the plans, where the septic system will be located for the phase one portion of the project. And that's also addressed under 13.4.17.2, which is page 204 of the chapter 13. And that talks about, except as otherwise specifically provided in this section, 13.4, civic space and civic buildings shall not be subject to the requirements of this section of 13.4, which talks about lot sizing, and instead shall be subject to such standards as may be determined by the Development Review Board. Regulation of civic buildings shall be subject to 4.6. So this is civic space. And in this, if we look at what's permitted, so a green, again, I'm looking at page 205. A green is permitted in CD4, which is the zone that we're in. And so it needs to be a minimum of a half an acre and no larger than 5 acres. And this particular parcel that we're looking at here is 0.6 acres. So green space, civic space, that parcel configuration is covered under 13.4.17.2, again, on page 204. So, so we believe that we are in complete compliance with the chapter 13 regulations for these two items that Mr. Flynn has described in his staff notes. Okay. And I also note that should you feel that a waiver is required, that staff is recommending that one be granted. So, all right.
Yeah, here, where's the section on private frontage? Sorry.
So if you look at just a second here, starting on page 191. of the current regulations. You'll see a diagram. It's 13.4.9.1, table 13.4.9.1 private frontage types. And so you can see those blue zones when we talk about private frontage, those blue zones, whether it's common yard or porch or stoop or forecourt, shop front, office front. Those are all types of private frontage. And in this particular case, and we'll see it when we look at the building elevations and floor plans under site plan, that we are a porch private frontage type, which is permitted in the CD4 district.
I'm not sure the private frontage, I'm not sure the private frontage precludes a dimensional analysis, dimensional requirement. Because it's private, it still has to meet the dimensional requirement, I would think.
Well, in this particular case, private frontage describes a place. Again, if you look at the descriptions, it's a type. And then the dimensional requirements that you're discussing go back into the different lot dimensions within the zone. That the building has to be located between 3 and 20 feet from the property line on the front, or from 0 to 5 feet on the side yard. And so those dimensions are required under the Chapter 13 rules, and we do meet those.
Is your question more based on the lot size dimension, the 70 feet, or you?
Building size. The discussion here says that because the rule talks about, you know, it just has to meet the private frontage requirement, as therefore it does not have to meet the dimensional requirement. That waiver is required.
That's with regards to the lot size.
So,
Okay, I think that's what he's talking about.
and there's two pieces.
Yeah.
So, so the building doesn't need to conform with the building dimensional requirements in terms of width. But there's two pieces: private frontage, so that's the type, stoop, business, shop front, and then building placement standards under this article. And so the building placement standards say that essentially that the building has to be located between 3 and 20 feet of the primary frontage, that it can be between 0 and 5 feet for the sidelines. So, and it does comply with the dimensional requirements. Those requirements are bear with me for just a moment.
I don't want to close the hearing and find out later that a waiver, we decide later that a waiver was required. So I would at this point be more comfortable proceeding with assuming that we're going to ask a waiver request.
So I think what he's talking about, Rick, is basically is when you brought up section 13.1.3.5, supplemental to existing structures. That basically, essentially the redevelopment area, essentially the regulations say that each, your lot should be 70 feet width, right? The frontage
Max.
yeah.
Correct.
And so basically we've got a lot here that incorporates the mill building with the parking area and the concrete structure that basically has greater frontage than it has greater. The lot is bigger than 70 feet. Here we go.
Correct.
And so what you're saying is that basically through section 13.1.3.5, that a waiver is not required because of that section. It allows for the consideration of the redevelopment of the building, so those sections of the regulation do not apply. So,
And this is a read actually from the folks who wrote the regulations originally. But I respect your position, and if it's belts and suspenders, we request a waiver, we can talk about that. I thought we could eliminate the time that it would take to discuss the waiver and how that would work, because I believe the rules essentially address this very specific thing. What happens when you have an existing building? And do you have to tear the building down or redevelop the building to meet the lot size requirements? And the answer is no. But you do need to place that building on whatever lot you end up with in a way that conforms with section 13.331A through 1B. So, which we believe we do in terms of the first layer, second layer, and third layer on that. Ponder that, we can discuss some other things, or
Yeah, go ahead.
So as we discussed, all the legal documents, so there's two sets of declarations in the application. One is for the mill yard development, which is the entire development, and the other is for the old mill development, which is specifically the development of the old mill building. And so there's association documents that describe how utilities will be shared, how parking will work, and all the other legal requirements to let people know what their rights are as members of that association. That's my understanding. Those documents are currently under review. All right, I'm now looking at page 7 of the comments, conformity with public works specifications. So chapter 13 has a whole section on roadway assemblies, how thoroughfares should be created, the widths, dimensions of those. And Chris, maybe we should go to another plan at this point.
is it within the updated sheets or the other?
Yeah, if you go to probably the phasing plan next is probably the easiest place to see that the sheet 8 of 8 on that.
Sheet of 8? This one?
Yeah, let's do that. That's probably the easiest.
Okay.
All right, so there are a couple of different thoroughfare types that we're using. And then those are the neighborhood street standards, the park street standards, and the alley standards. And so the neighborhood street standard is pretty well typified by Hearthside Drive that we see here. Essentially, it's a 2-lane road with parallel parking on both sides as required under the Chapter 13 guidelines. A park street is demonstrated, depicted here on Wedgwood, which allows parking on one side of the street, not on the park side. And then the alley standard is represented by access to the rear of the lots all throughout the development. So all of these streets, all of these geometries meet the roadway cross-sectional requirements for the thoroughfares under Chapter 13. Later in the plans, we probably won't maybe even dig that deep, but all of these roadways have been designed. All the geometry has been prepared. So all the grading, centerline grading, all the information required to lay these streets out properly in geometric form, in accordance with good roadway design, are all included in these plans, as requested under the preliminary hearing, that we provide complete roadway designs. So I'm on page 7, looking at 11.4.2 lots shall be sufficient size to provide adequate building site, suitable areas and adequate isolation distances for sewage disposal, water supply, both on-site neighboring properties. So in this case, as we discussed, the line that you see here is the outline of the septic system. This septic system is set up, is designed to serve all of the lots within phase 1. And phase 1 is this bounding red line. So this is the limit of phase 1. So everything you see here is in phase 1. And so essentially all of the dark green grass versus the light green grass are the limits of phase 1.
Let me just go back to roadway design. You did the roadway design and you have 2 exits onto Park Street, right? So when you exit onto Park Street, you'll be those exits will actually be, those curb cuts will actually be in the town of Underhill.
When we get to phase 2, we will definitely be in contact with Underhill. So under phase 1.
But there's no have you actually looked at all of the Underhill standards? Is there any conflict between, the roadway then becoming a curb cut onto Park Street?
We have not looked at the specifics. We know that this meets general geometry requirements in terms of spacing between intersections and other good design features. But again, we are basing this, essentially the armature that sits here, based on the very original plans that were prepared, the concept plans prepared by PUPCD for the town, for where connectivity was desired. But yes, we certainly understand, because right there is the limit between Underhill and Jericho. So that little strip of land, so there may be this parcel and this parcel may not conform to Underhill standards in terms of frontage. So these 3 parcels may be a bone of contention between Chapter 13 standards in Jericho and subdivision standards in Underhill, which is something
you worked out.
we'll have to cross that bridge. But as I say, none of this construction is proposed. We and the town wanted to know how this would all work out. And essentially what phase 2 anything after phase 1 is a depiction to show, can the project be developed in a way that meets all of the current standards? I can guarantee you that between now and the final development of the last lot, some of these lots will change in size in terms of where these lines are. The road won't change, the alley won't change. But if someone purchases a lot and only needs half and only wants 18 feet wide, which is allowed under Chapter 13, so there'll be some other modifications. But again, this is to show that there is at least one way to meet all of the standards of Chapter 13. So, okay, so that's septic system. So there's our wastewater. Water will be provided by the Underhill Jericho Water District. They've granted us sufficient allocations. So we have a water source. If we get to water plans, I can show you where those connections would be. They've asked us to loop their system to provide multiple locations, so that they right now they don't have a connection between Route 15 and River. We'll provide the piping that will allow that to be looped, so they can backfeed from multiple directions, and we've coordinated with them on that topic. So that's water. Stormwater for phase 1 will be an infiltration gallery that'll be built underneath this parking lot. And again, there's pages of details of that in your plan set. For phase two, we're looking at stormwater galleries under this parking lot and stormwater galleries under this parking lot. And we believe we can address and satisfy current state stormwater requirements for the whole project with these subsurface infiltration practices and pretreatment. So that covers stormwater.
And the infiltration basins are the same that you used for the bank property, you think, so.
That's correct. Right now,
So,
it's a little bit off screen here, but the bank was developed, as you may recall. This area is a subsurface stormwater system that's there to treat all the impervious surfaces here and future impervious surfaces for the remainder of lot two, which is these two lots. So this is technology that we've used successfully on the site in previous development steps. Talk about water supply, talk about sewage disposal.
Sewage disposal that's underneath that will have the capacity for how much?
So this will be able to serve the residential uses, the future commercial and the residential uses. So right now the proposal is, and you'll see this in the floor plans that were submitted, 10 units of 10 dwelling units in this, some 1 bedroom, some 2 bedroom units. And then single family home, single family home, single family home here. And we've predicted that these would be commercial lots here. And so our flows to this system are based on that prediction of, for this core, mainly residential and some commercial. This is a dual alternating system. And so there's actually 2 full septic systems within this rectangle, so that they can be alternated on an annual basis. So under the rules, we're not required to do that, but we've done this to make sure that we've got a system that will have great longevity.
Is that an indirect discharge?
No, we're
under?
under
Good.
indirect discharge for our total flow. So, all right. In terms of landscaping for phase one, obviously the primary landscaping is in the streetscape. We've got a series of trees, and we can actually see that when we go to the landscaping plan for the different species. But essentially under chapter 13, there's a required minimum spacing, and there's essentially required species. And so these species conform with the table found in chapter 13, and that's back in page 215 of the current standards, and which tree species are essentially permitted by right within this zone, and all of these species conform. And the spacing conforms with the street tree spacing requirements. Little hard to see here, but interspersed between these are also street lights. We have details of those in the plan set. So the lights that we're proposing to use are very similar to what's been used already along Route 15, very similar to the lights that were used around the bank, which is the fluted pole with the octagonal lamp head, the kind of historic gas lamp. So that's the light that we are proposing. And we can look at those details if you'd like. In terms of utilities, chapter 13 requires that all of the utilities be placed underground, and that all of the metering devices be placed on the back of the buildings. So gas meters, electric meters, water meter, any kind of metering devices need to be on the back of the building, not on the side, not on the front, but the back. So what we've done is created utility easements all along the back alleys. We worked very closely with Green Mountain Power over the course of about a year to get the power layout so that they were comfortable where their transformers would go, where their cabinets would go. And all of the power will run in these alleyways with a few exceptions where we have to cross a street to run down a property line to get to another part of the project, but almost the vast majority of it will run in the back. The right-of-way width for these alleys is 24 feet. And so we've got enough space for the power company to live within an easement that they desire, and then also the gas company to lay a gas line far enough away from the power company so that those two can be properly separated. So all the utilities will be underground. Green Mountain Power is proposing to start their power feed from poles on Route 15 and then come into the site and have, I think we're now at 2 separate looped systems within the project that we desired. So we worked very closely with them to work this out, because this is something a little bit different than they're obviously used to. They're used to being in the road right of way and coming in the front of structures. In terms of erosion control and sediment during construction, we have actually 4 sheets, EC 1, 2, 3, and SM1 that are all about control of erosion during construction. All in conformance with current standards. One of the permits that we'll need to get from the state is a construction general permit because of the amount of area that we'll be disturbing. And so all the construction work will have to conform with state standards with regard to what happens on site during construction and stabilization of the site during construction and after construction. So one of the requirements under chapter 13 is the block, maximum block dimension. And so essentially the goal is that no distance around a block or pieces of a block that you can circumnavigate that and not have to go any further than 2,500 feet. And multi-use routes like these alleys count as long as they're greater than 10 feet wide as one of those routes. And so because of that, we are well under the 2,500 foot block perimeter requirement under chapter 13. So we are good there.
For example, what is that big block? What's the biggest number? Like around that parking lot?
Here. Let's see. So it's going to be in the.
Blow it up so you can.
Yeah, let me just measure.
No, you could just guess. I mean, what do you think that is? Is that 800? Is that?
Well, so across the frontage, it's going to be. So like 300, and so 3, there's 6, and then. So it's not around the whole block because of this connection. So it's this section, but because we've got walks here, this is the biggest block, and it's going to be, in the 1,600 foot, maybe.
That's fine.
Probably less.
Okay.
So there are some conversations about building placement. We'll talk about that when we get into site plan. Again, when we talk about the thoroughfares, all of the road geometries, the curb radii, the location of the sidewalks, the positioning of the green belt, all are in conformance with the street structures as specified in chapter 13.
What kind of uses are gonna be allowed on top of that double septic field?
Here, none. So this will be a grass park essentially. I should say,
People can play on it.
oh yeah,
That kind of stuff.
recreation, no buildings, obviously, no parking, but passive recreation all day long, no problem at all. Walk your dog, sit in the sun, whatever you'd like to do in a park type setting would be allowed there. All right, so we talked about block.
In reference for the board, some of the original plans actually had structures all in that area. And there was the important desire for a civic space for this type of development. As well as for the phasing of the project, because it needed a combination of civic space as well as the ability to support the infrastructure. So they were able to combine both of them in one area to meet that requirement. And that's where we, end up with this green space, which is really properly located because of that, the predominant view of Mansfield and that entrance into that area, as well as supporting the nature of the existing mill building as opposed to having buildings blocking
Got
that.
that view from the parking lot.
So,
It's still, right? Still have that view across the green space.
Yeah, right through. And the civic space is required to be near one of the main thoroughfares within the development, not tucked away. And this certainly is along that main route in and out. So.
Now, I don't know if it's appropriate for this or for the next piece, but the existing commuter parking lot for the bus.
So right now, ECTA is right here. And they were actually originally permitted to be here. But somewhere along the line, they relocated to here. And I believe that Greg has been in contact with them about relocating to some other place on the development to provide that use in the future. So I know he's been in conversation. I don't know where that specifically will go, but it is being considered.
there have been discussions with, I guess it's Green Mountain Transit, I think that's the proper board and body, for the commuter lot. There's been some discussion behind the existing post office
Okay,
for a parking lot. The property owner is amenable to, to that allowance. It also maybe helps out with the Palmer's creamy parking issues that tend to come up on hot days. So,
but that's quite a distance from the spot.
well, this is private property and they have an arrangement, so basically,
Right.
so this is something that Green Mountain Transit will have to address.
Okay.
So,
We just we're- standard, we talked about that, thoroughfare standards. We meet, yeah, which types, accommodations, public frontage.
Me too. Usually put them all files on the folder.
I think those are probably the high points of staff notes. We can look at other plan sheets. There are numerous plan sheets that provide any detail if you'd like to delve into how the water line will be run, where the sewer's running, and what our pump station details look like. I'm guessing probably not. I'd love to talk about those. It's really exciting, but I understand you don't feel the same. But if there are specific questions, like, as I say, there are multiple plan sheets that we can take a look at. If you have any specific questions about this piece, and perhaps we can go back to the discussion of waiver for this parcel and the civic space parcel, if you're looking to buttress the read of the chapter 13 regulations.
you're amenable if we decide, I don't want to take up time now discussing that, but if we come back after deliberation and ask for a waiver as a condition,
Yeah, no issue there.
then we can take
Okay.
What the board can do is, it's in section 10-12-4, I think is the waiver. Request, and there's certain criteria. So the board, if the board can vet your proposal, they can look at the regulation from the subdivision standpoint. If they do feel that, it would be applicable, then basically a waiver request, in writing, acknowledging that.
And happy to do that. The one thing I will say is, the very first part of the preamble of chapter 13 that says anything that's covered in here supersedes anything that comes before it in the regulations. And so we just want to be sure that we're not crossing a line that chapter 13 puts down in terms of a solution that comes out of another part of the regulations that chapter 13 says doesn't apply since it has been addressed. So that's the one issue that you'll want to tread.
That'll be my job to make sure that
Exactly.
chapter 13 doesn't become subordinate to chapter 10 in the subdivision regulations, if it's applicable, and it'll be a discussion that.
Is there anything specifically, that you'd like to look at the other plan sheets? To delve into greater detail on the subdivision? Again, this subdivision configuration is exactly the same as was presented under preliminary plan. The only exception to that is that this park facility has been extended in this direction. So before, this curb line and this roadway was located right here. But having to meet the state standards, we pushed this system back to give us a little more buffer at the toe. So the only difference is right there. Everything else in terms of the lot configuration, the alleys, everything else is exactly as what was presented under the preliminary plan. I'm sorry, I meant to mention that sooner.
I have a question.
Yeah,
Chris, you say, I don't know if this is for this hearing or for the
Sure.
second part, but I know that you provided a traffic study. Is that applicable to this conversation, or is this?
There's a bunch of overlap, so it's not inappropriate. I mean, traffic is applicable with regards to the subdivision, but it's also handled under site plan.
Okay, because
But you've got there's two different things. I mean, traffic for the whole 15 acres is one thing, and then traffic, and you'll have to tell them what's been submitted if with regards to the numbers have been just for phase one.
right,
And so if everything's been submitted for everything, then they can potentially answer. If it's only been submitted for phase one, then then the board can have a finding that traffic information needs to be, for the future phases, if this is, reaches, an approvable standard.
yeah,
So to answer your question, the traffic study that's been presented covers the entire development. And so, because the request was show us all the roads, when we did the traffic study, we said, let's do the entire development and see what the impacts are. And that's based on some assumptions in terms of what we had to do is look at every single lot, decide what the highest best use of that lot was, go to the ITE tables, figure out what the trip generation for that particular use was of that particular size, and then predict if you were a residence on this corner and you were going north, which way would you go? If you were going south, which way would you go? And we created groups of regions within the development that would most likely choose one route or another. And the traffic study covers all of that and which numbers come from which parcels. And essentially the bottom line, that the most important piece is that in terms of trip generation, one of the key triggers is 75 trips in the peak hour of the adjacent street. And if you generate more than 75 trips, let's say peak hour trips at this intersection, then usually that requires further study of what's happening at other intersections around the development. With full build out, with the assumption of fairly conservative, i.e. high use, we never got to 75 peak hour trips at any of the development intersections, the peak hour of the adjacent street. So that's kind of the executive summary piece, which was, did we meet that threshold that usually says, well, okay, it's time to do a little bit more? And the answer was no.
What number did you get to?
It depends on the intersection. Let me go to the traffic.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what influence the current, maybe that's a phase one question about just having one inlet and outlet or two up the same street
When again,
at this point.
at full build out. The adjacent generator.
You want to bring up the traffic study, you have it,
I can, yeah.
that's around the topic.
Yeah, if you go back to the traffic study and then go, yep, if you open that up and then scroll through, and there's the easiest way to do this is go past the tables.
Thank you.
All right, so this plan essentially shows the districts that we separated the project into, and then if you go into the next sheet. So this is trip generation AM of the adjacent street. So here you can see, and the keys are, we've got the turning movements broken down, but for the full development, 51, 20, and 30 in the peak hour. So that's for the full development in the morning, peak hour of the adjacent streets. And this is based on traffic counts that we performed on Route 15, traffic counts that we also got data from VTrans in terms of the Route 15 and other traffic. But turning movements here, especially around the grocery store, we actually did counts to see kind of what was happening here along.
What's those numbers like 13 up there with the big 30 on the left? And then you have little number 13.
Yeah, so this is,
3. What are those numbers?
this is all the trips in and out. And
Uh-huh.
then here's the number in and out, and then here's that breakdown in and out. So so that's all the trips in and out in that peak hour, and then how they're broken down into turning movements, and it's the same as we go. And if we go to the next page. And these are the two that are of most interest. So this is going to be PM peak hour of the adjacent street. And so here's 67. So again, we're underneath that 75. So any other questions about trip generation? Again, this is all based on a prediction of what's going to be, how this is going to be developed. And essentially we called this residential, some commercial here and some commercial here, in terms of our numbers. So
can you explain to everybody, so you have, when you go through Act 250, you'll have to go through this again?
yes, and so with Act 250, our goal will be to under Act 250, there are 10 criterion, and there are some criterion that we can only address for specifically for phase one. But there are some criterion that we can address for the whole project, and so we'll try to get an umbrella permit for as many of the topics that we can. For traffic generation will probably be just phase one as we do this, because one of the things that happens under Act 250 is for every peak hour trip that we run through the intersection at Clark's, because that was built with VTrans money, it was related to a safety project. Every peak hour trip that we show goes through there pays thousands of dollars in trip generation fees under a rule that was passed several years ago. If we weren't in Act 250, we would not have to pay that, but under Act 250, we'll have to pay those fees. And so Most likely, we're going to limit our impacts to phase one and not pay for traffic until that traffic is known and developed for the intersection that we see up the road here. But things like historic preservation, prime ag soils, conformance with the local plan. There are many of the items in the 10 criterion that we can do for the whole development, and the ones that we can, we will for that. And obviously, the first step is conformance with local plan, and that's where you get to participate. All good with traffic?
Good, Andy.
For now.
If you go back to the plot, so I have one question about pedestrian access to the one.
Is this what you wanted? Or you wanted the
Yeah,
other?
the one that you were showing before.
Yeah, if you go to,
That one, Jeff?
that's probably the best in terms of the overall
That,
view.
that work for you?
Yeah, it is. So how will people get, if you want to walk to the store, how do you walk to the store?
So if you live here, you've got sidewalk to here. There's sidewalk here, there's parking here. So, and eventually when lot 2 gets developed, there's a sidewalk that's here. And we know that there's going to be sidewalk when lot 2 gets developed, it will connect to here. And so that would get you to the bank and also get you to the store in that way. So all of these strips that you see are sidewalk, and under chapter 13, interestingly enough, most sidewalks are 5 feet wide. All of these sidewalks are 6. So they're a foot wider than what would be considered a normal walk due to the chapter 13 thoroughfare cross-section standards.
You ever think about putting a sign on that little corner, right? That little corner there of the store? Up there, yeah, both there, right? Putting a
We're
access through there.
Yeah, there's actually going to be a utility easement that's gonna run, I think we ended up here. And so there could be as a part of this development, because there'll be Green Mountain Power requires a 10-foot minimum easement for their power. And we're gonna have power that runs down and then come across, and we've got transformer and switchgear mounted here in the parking lot. So there certainly could be, when this area gets developed, because there will be a spot here where no building can do zero lot line, where that power line will go through. So there could be a walk there.
That's the way the kids will go.
And the old folks when there's no snow,
Right.
like me.
Talk a little bit about the size of that parking lot. You want to do it in this part?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, actually, that's one thing, just if you can, there's a section in section 13 talks about parking and parking required, even though it's gonna be duplicative.
Yeah,
But just-
actually, let's do that in site plan, because we're gonna be spending quite a lot of time.
Okay, all right.
And let's
Okay.
do the parking under site plan. It's probably keep your records a little
Okay, that's fine.
little easier.
Can these, because you're showing a layout, right, of the proposed subdivided properties, can they be subdivided in the future beyond what they're shown here?
So the answer to that is yes. The minimum lot width in chapter 13 is 18 feet. The maximum is 70. So the biggest lots you can see here are 70 feet wide on their primary frontage. And those lots could be divided up 3 more times essentially and still meet the standards under chapter 13. And then the other interesting part of chapter 13 is zero lot line construction is permitted. And so a building could be built in this zone, let's say, that went from here to here, that covered this whole frontage. But what's required is that there be a break, a setback, a change of at least 4 feet every 50 feet along that frontage, so that it doesn't appear as a monolith. So you wouldn't get Brooklyn brownstone look with a single face with stoops out front. The building would have to be set back and forward and back forward, and and architecturally diversified within those 50-foot bands. But if you did that, you could actually have a 0 lot line construction that would meet that. And so there's flexibility both on the lot width, but also then what you can do on the lot. And zero lot line sidelines is allowed. So so it could give a very, very urban, potentially urban feel.
So a bunch of these funky lots, configurations like near the sawmill building now, if you go down,
Here,
like, yeah, like those funky lots, like what is the intended potential use of those?
So right
Lot.
now, we're calling these V lots, so we've got V1 through 5. That these would be commercial spaces. And these are here because, again, of the requirement of no greater than 70 feet. And along this frontage, dividing this up, again, there could be something that's built in conjunction with the reuse of the sawdust building, so there could be an expansion that comes out here. But essentially, this is a solution, as I said before, of how these parcels can be divided and meet the standards. And this is one of the learning processes, at least for me. Typically, in the past, it's been a lot has to be at least a certain size. Well, in this case, there really is no minimum size, it's just a minimum width. And so these parcels meet that, but we envision that probably this will be part of whatever happens to the sawdust building will be into this zone, into these lots. So
even though they're funky, you're looking at, do they meet the rules? Not the
Yeah.
functionality, so.
But we'd want to have it, meeting the rules, of course, but you want to make sure that they're usable lots. I don't
That's
think
what-
just banking on the sawmill building, purchasing that and adding it is. It's just a question. That's
Yeah.
all I'm asking about. Of like, what's the logic behind how that's laid out? And
essentially, it's driven by chapter 13.
we got some
that's how
regulation
that
issues.
that came about.
I'm sure the property owner wants to get the highest and best value. For most of
So
them.
the actual, in the dark green, this part of the subdivision review, we're not reviewing. You're saying that those are still subject to change.
What you're doing is you're approving this. What you're doing is you're approving this subdivision proposal, which basically is all the lots that are being shown.
All the lots that are being.
Yeah, all the lots that are
All
being
the
shown.
lots that are being
Right.
shown.
That's not to say that, okay, that you, who, whatever, I could come in here and I could buy this lot.
Mhm.
And I could re-subdivide that lot per the regulations.
But would have to come back before you
Yeah,
because it'd be a modification of the subdivision.
yeah, so, you could see quite a few
So for now,
applications.
we are fixing all those, we are approving that whole subdivision.
Yep.
And all those dimensions that have been just set.
Would there be enough sewer capacity if somebody came in and said, oh, I want to subdivide these lots and build extra on there? Or is there enough for what's there right now?
So it depends on which phase we're talking about. So for phase 1, if we've said, and because of chapter 13, so this is the other piece that took a little while to get my head around. A business could be located here, this could be a residence, this could be a business, this could be a residence, because all can coexist within the CD4 next to each other. There's no prohibition with that. So right now, we're saying that this is going to be a residence and that has X amount of flow. Well, somebody could come in and say, look, I want to do a business with 5 employees, and I'm only going to use a fraction of that residence flow. So, and I only need part of this parcel, so I'm going to develop the piece that I want and leave the remainder of that allocation for that particular lot. Whatever's left on my remainder lot. So that is possible. And right now, we've designed this for, as I say, residents. These are all residences. This is a residence, 10 residences, a residence here. And then businesses here with, I think, 6 employees on average, on each of these lots to get to our flows that we need to present to the state for our water wastewater permit. So sewer will be the limiting factor in terms of what can happen, because we're limited to a certain amount here. Phase 2 is another story in terms of what we're planning and what we've been talking about in terms of how to deal with phase 2. But phase 1, we've got a certain number, and as long as the people who are purchasing and developing stay within the limits for the parcel, there is some modification that can happen within those numbers.
Just so you know, Matt, from a wastewater standpoint, the town doesn't have jurisdiction over that. It goes to the state. So our responsibility is to make sure they're talking to the state and they get their proper approvals
Yeah.
for the uses they're proposing.
In terms of the site plan, like off Route 15, for instance, if you look over there, there's a lot of interstitial type spaces like between the road and the church property. You know, that's not necessarily a lot, right? Like what are all those
Yeah, so
spaces and
this area right here is, we call it, these are all OM1, OM2, Old Mill.
Mhm.
And so these are common areas that will be utilized by the folks who front on this. And this particular piece is our underground utility easement to get power from here down into this area. So this will be underground utilities will come through this corridor.
got it. Who maintains that? Those common spaces that you're describing?
So that would be up to the association, and that's part of the declaration that says you have the right to use this, you have the right to pay for your percentage share of use, you have the right to pay for maintenance of
Got
that. So that's all in the declaration documents.
Thanks.
Do a bit of public comment on the subdivision portion, or?
I don't really have anything else. I mean, basically, I wanted to, because section 13 talks of parking requirements and, you know, it's still covered underneath the site plan review, you know, so whether it's gonna get covered. So I don't think it's really applicable. Or I mean, it is applicable, but the board can if they were to approve the subdivision, they could say, you know, based on this, we have a finding from the site plan review that, you know, these things were compatible or compliant with this section of the parking requirement. The subdivision, I mean, it's part of the subdivision. They're combined, you know, to a degree.
Any more questions from the board on this portion of it? You can ask questions a bit later if they come.
Yeah, we go to the public.
Certainly.
At this point, are there any public questions on what we've seen so far? You can ask your questions at the end of the character-based review as well. Any questions? Yeah, say your name.
You gotta state your name and come up so we can hear you.
Steve Matera. I'm also a resident of Jericho. Very interested in the project, but I'm also an alternate for the DRB, but I'm speaking as myself, not a member of the DRB. And I just want to follow up on the question about wastewater and ask about the supply side and what happens if these splits do occur on some of these lots down the road. So if a lot was purchased, subdivided, the water district has sized their commitment based upon the plans and forecasts that they have already, but what happens with change down the road?
Okay, so we just wait, you ask the question and then we'll get an answer. We'll go around, collect all the questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question they want to ask about this portion?
I have questions, but I think I would probably be better to wait if the questions qualify for either hearing, since
Okay.
you're closing one hearing
Yeah,
and then.
and we'll
opening
get some more
another.
information and maybe get some answers that way. Yeah.
So that's okay,
Yeah,
just to wait
that's
for
okay.
the other one? Okay.
Yeah.
If anybody is online who wants to ask a question, you need to raise your hand so I can bring you in. And if you don't, perfect.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Brad Holden. I'm the Underhill Town Administrator here on the authority of the Select Board. And regarding the January 5th, 2024 letter written to you, Chairperson York, we had requested that this be read into the record.
Okay, do you want to read it or do we?
It's addressed to you, but if you don't, if you'd like to read it, I could read it, whatever you'd like.
I would rather just provide copies to everybody in the board.
That's not really what read into the record means.
Okay,
Can read it. Go ahead and read it then.
So
go ahead and read it.
January 5th, 2024, Jericho Development Review Board, Jeff York, Chairperson. Regarding the Old Mill Properties LLC, 366 Vermont 15, comments regarding final subdivisions and final and site plan review. Dear Chairperson York, the town of Underhill has two primary concerns regarding the application referenced above that you are considering for approval. We request that this letter be read into the public as part of the public record. Final subdivision site plan review hearing proceedings, which we understand will be held on Wednesday, January 24th. By way of background, in January of 1930, the Vermont Supreme Court issued a decision accepting a report prepared by certain court-appointed commissioners that established the municipal boundary between Jericho and Underhill. Thereafter, in 1931, a survey prepared by the commissioners was recorded in the land records of both towns. Monuments were set to perpetuate the municipal boundary line. Unfortunately, some years ago, a key monument was removed during the Jericho sidewalk project on River Road, and never replaced. Nonetheless, the boundary line is clearly discernible as depicted on the survey. It bisects the front of the businesses and houses lining the southwesterly side of Park Street. As a result, the entire length of Park Street, except for a short portion on the northerly end, lies in the town of Underhill. The town of Jericho only has the authority to review and approve land development within its municipal boundaries. Therefore, we request that any Jericho DRB decision regarding the proposed project clearly recognizes this fact to avoid the perception that the DRB is granting development approval or access onto a town highway, Park Street in this case, that is not within the town of Jericho's or its jurisdictional authority. We emphasize this. While perhaps an oversight, Jericho has failed to recognize Underhill's authority regarding access to Park Street in the past. Specifically, on August 6th, 2020, the Jericho DRB approved a 4-lot subdivision located at 22 Park Street with a new access located within the Park Street right-of-way limits, which Underhill controls, without prior notice to Underhill. This leads to a second concern related to increased traffic flows from the proposed development. Currently, traffic coming from Underhill Center and/or traffic coming from Vermont 15 east and westbound during commuting hours utilizes Park Street to go to the Browns River Middle School and/or to gain access onto Vermont Route 15. Commuters know that they may become bogged down in congestion, which often forms at the River Road Vermont 15 intersection. This above referenced proposal depicts 2 access points onto Park Street. These new access points could potentially be accessible to nearly 100 lots and an unknown number of total units when the project is fully built out. This has the potential to substantially increase traffic and traffic-related conflicts on Park Street and its environs. Phase 1 of the proposed project, I'm just going to read this whole thing, but phase 1 of the proposed project is also concerned. Phase 1 traffic will have the option to travel west on River Road to Route 15, or go the short distance east to Park Street to gain access onto Route 15, potentially increasing traffic onto Park Street and Underhill. The traffic derived from the traffic study entitled Old Mill Properties LLC, Lot 1 Development Traffic Study, Trip Generation and Distribution, relies on data taken from a 1977 study on Park Street and assumes the distribution to be even between both lanes. In our view, much has changed on Park Street and the surrounding roads since 1977. Parents delivering their children to school has become commonplace. And we believe a more current traffic study, especially one conducted at the time of year when school is in session, may reveal very different results. With increased vehicular traffic, we would also expect to see an increase in pedestrian traffic as well. For example, we would expect an increased usage of the Underhill Post Office by pedestrians. Presently, however, Park Street has no existing crosswalks. This may lead to increased pedestrian vehicle conflicts and new safety issues. Stormwater is also a major issue. With several recent flood events in and around the post office area, it appears, and is our understanding based upon the civil plan set drawing, that stormwater from the project will be totally contained on the Old Mill property. If that is not the case, however, it is a concern as Park Street is currently not capable of accepting any more stormwater. While Underhill has some other concerns regarding the project, we have addressed our major issues here. We look forward to continuing the conversation and working with the applicant to obtain any necessary approvals from the town of Underhill, including required access permit approvals. And we ask that the Jericho DRB take Underhill's jurisdictional authority and the issues raised in this letter into account in any final decision they may render. Thank you, and please let us know if you have any questions, the Underhill Select Board. I would just like to finish too by just giving you a little background about jurisdictional authority. So in Vermont, we follow what's called Dillon's rule. So Dillon's rule, a municipality only has those powers and functions specifically authorized by the legislature. It's well accepted that in enabling statutes in Title 24 grant the municipality the power to regulate land use only within that municipality's border. I'd just like to finish to say, you know, we share a fire department, we share a park district, we share a library, and we also share a joint village center designation in this very area. I just feel a little bit disappointed in a way that we weren't included on the conversation a little earlier. But here we are, and we're not here to derail anyone's plans. We just clearly want to state our jurisdiction. So thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Are there any other questions? So, Rick, I know it is a question about wastewater, which is really state, but would you mind answering the question about
No.
how the state calculates changes and increases in population given that a fixed unit of capacity?
So let's focus on phase one, and our WW permit will authorize, when granted, a certain amount of flow that will be permitted to go to this leach field. And so that will be the headroom that's available for any of the development of the lots. And typically what would happen is, the developer would identify, we have identified predicted amounts of flow from each lot. So if someone came to purchase, say, this lot, they'd be told, this is the allocation that you have. Whatever you do in terms of development has to fall within that amount. So then, depending on the use, so the state has use tables, whether it's residential, whether it's commercial, whether it's a doctor's office. And each of those tables have assigned flow rates. And as long as the combination of whatever use falls within the flow rates that were allocated, then each party is going to need to go to the state and get an amendment to the WW permit as they make the individual connections into the collection system. It goes to a pump station here that then distributes flow, effluent into the leach field. So with each development will require an amendment to that original permit that authorizes this and the construction of the collection piping to get the flow to the pump station that will then deliver it to the leach field. So that's the,
When they purchase that lot, they know what that allocation is,
yes.
and they're not allowed to exceed that allocation.
Yes, and there are a couple different ways that this can happen. Let's say we had keyed this for a residence, somebody wants to do a business and they're using a third of that amount. The owner can say, okay, I'm going to give you the third of that amount, and whatever's left over goes into the pot. So that when somebody comes along and says, look, I'd like to put a little restaurant in here, that those additional flows. So that's managed by the developer, how they grant those allocations per lot. But in the end, the limit is what can we flow, what was approved, the total number of gallons a day. And not to get too deep in the weeds, but there are other things that can be done. If you pre-treat your effluent, you can actually increase the amount of flow that would have allocated as regular effluent. If you pre-treat, you can do a little more. But essentially, we're locked in here, and everybody who comes along and makes the connection will need a wastewater permit amendment to the original permit for that. So that's what will control the sewage use.
Okay, thank you. So we'll close this part. Any other last questions? We'll close this part of the hearing and move on to the character-based
Your site plan.
site plan.
Yep. One. Where do you want to start, Rick?
I think we can stay here, and then when we get into some of the other pieces, we can delve into some of the other plans around the building and probably go to the building elevations. So we can talk about your concerns with our private frontage. Okay. So again, in the very beginning is a discussion about the lot dimensions for lot T1, which has the mill building on it. I think we've covered that in terms of whether the rules cover that instance, also for the park, the civic space, for the waiver. So I won't duplicate that conversation. Let's go to the building elevations if we could, Chris, because let's jump right into your comment about frontage, private frontage. And if you scroll ahead, we can actually see the building elevations. Well, just slow down for a second. You can actually see, so here's the proposed layout of that the architect has provided for the use of the mill building. And again, residential use, some single bedroom units, some dual bedroom units, and access and how that the mill building will be laid out. So again, if we scroll up to the next sheet, we can see the elevations.
Can we just zoom in on this one?
Yeah, let's zoom in right here. I think is probably the best. Actually, let's go down just a little bit farther. So this is the elevation proposed, and this will be the area. This is the side of the building that faces the parking lot. So porches, access stairs to the access doors. And if we scroll back up to the front, so what was originally proposed were the porches, but no stairs essentially to street grade here. And so Chris has pointed out because of this is the primary frontage, chapter 13 recommends that the entrance be available from that primary side. All we need to do here is just provide stairs to grade to get us to the sidewalk. And it would look like this. And so we would welcome a condition that the approval that these doors along the route that faces the park on that primary frontage have stairs to allow the complete porch assembly that's a part of the porch private frontage under the rules. So I think that's probably one of the key comments.
As an example, Union Bank, everybody enters from the parking lot. But there's a front door that fronts on Route 15, so the building has an orientation and looks like that's the front of the building, so that's what you would expect to see, but I don't know if anybody ever uses that. So that's a similar reasoning for what we're talking about here.
And again, the addition is very simple. It's just a matter of adding stairs to those porches that face the park. I'm very, very happy to accept the condition for that.
Can we go back to a plan? Or leave it here?
Let me just look through the comments and see what the next
Why do I think the sawmill building's taller than that?
We're not seeing the top of the roof line.
Isn't
Well,
it
top of the
isn't it
ones
a
are here.
big two-story building?
if you zoom out a little bit, you'll see in this elevation. So there's the roof.
Oh, okay.
So
That's what, it's all roof then, right?
yes, yeah, in terms of the facade, much of it's dominated by the roof
That's
structure.
why it looks so tall.
Right. And the other piece is with the grading, we're bringing the grade up around the building. And so as you know now, the foundation sits 5 feet plus above grade. And so we'll be softening that by bringing the grade up around the building. So.
And is there any use for it inside the building? That's not related to, is that just gonna be empty space up there in the attic, or is there?
I believe so.
People are gonna have second floors on their built in there?
No,
Yeah.
I believe that will be just truss space. All of the mechanical equipment, in terms of heating, cooling, condenser units, I believe are slated to go in the basement at this point, because there's vast amount of space below grade. So I believe that's the current plan for the mechanical equipment to keep it all down low. One of Mr. Flynn's suggestions relates to site plan approval expiration within 180 days. He's recommending that that be modified because of the permits that we still need to get once we're completed with the town. And so he's recommending an exemption from 10.5 and an incorporation of the zoning permit will not be issued until all the state permits are at hand. And so we would certainly appreciate a finding that had that versus the 180 days deadline.
What do you need in terms of, if 180 days is too quick, how much time do you need? I don't want to open it up for 100 years.
Well,
right? I don't want to say this is forever, but I do agree, having to go through Act 250 and unknown, maybe it's some period of time between 180 days and 100 years, but what number do you need?
I can't answer, but I could certainly see that the Act 250 process and again, not only do we have to deal with the town of Jericho, but we have to deal with the town of Underhill also. And then our technical permits, I mean, it could be a few more years before we were complete at Act 250. So 5 years be safe. That would probably be a safe number if you wanted to bring us back in 5. If we didn't have permits, if we don't have permits by then, I think Mr. Tatro will not be happy. And so I'm sure our goal is to get things done before then, but
Okay,
given the vagaries of permitting.
All right. thank you.
The intent there is there's the ability to grant extensions, but traditionally the applicant needs to come back to ask. So we're trying to avoid that because we know 180 days isn't going to work.
Yeah.
No matter how you cut it. So.
And so now I'm on page, this is 1 of 3, but it's not, it's the. Four, 5,
You have the number?
6, it's the 6th page of the 7th page of the comments, related to plan requirements. And this, is description of what kind of frontage building placement are we talking about? And so essentially our frontage type for this building, we're looking for approval, again, I'd mentioned is porch, which is an approved frontage type in CD4. Our frontage type, our building type is row house, and we fall under the row house category. And so the staff has asked us to describe which of those categories we fall into, and those are those categories. Civic space and the reskin rule. We talked about adding stairs. Elevation, building type and pitch. Again, I'll try to just hit high points here.
And also so the board knows that a lot of the criteria that Rick is paging through really is more applicable for new construction. Because we're redeveloping an existing building for the proposal, there's a bunch of things that, really aren't. They're not proposing to change. It pre-exists, so they're not really getting covered.
So now I'm to the page where we can talk about parking. And so the parking standards in chapter 13 in the Riverside Flats district is different than other districts in the community. And actually those standards have changed recently with the more recent rules with the 22 version. The parking requirements changed from the previous version of chapter 13 rules. But let's go back, Chris, to the site plan we're looking at that shows the phasing. That's probably, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you just zoom in here. So currently, under chapter 13, a residence is required 1 parking space. And so this is the minimum parking spaces. Commercial, anything not residential essentially falls into the category of 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet. So the parking lot that you see here, let's grab another sheet of paper here. So making the assumption again that this is residential use, this is going to be commercial use, and that the existing sawdust building is most likely going to be some sort of commercial use in the future. What that works out to be is for essentially the sawdust building. And what we've done is made a prediction in terms of the size of buildings that could fit on these lots based on the 70% coverage rule. And so between the sawdust building and those, we need about 34 parking spaces. So to serve these, and then 1 per unit here. So there's the 10, And then we've got these lots add another 9, 10, so 20 spaces for residential. And we need actually 23 for the sawdust building, and I'm sorry, 34 for these. So a total of 57 for commercial and 23 spaces for residential. There is probably spaces on these lots to have one parking space. But right now, this parking lot is about 75 spaces. And so we're right on the money in terms of the current chapter 13 standards for this parking area related to the uses that are adjacent to it. And the declaration documents have parking rights for this structure, parking rights for these lots that will be a part of the association agreement and also maintenance of the parking lot. So I think in terms of size, we're right where we need to be in accordance with the current chapter 13 parking standards. Questions there? Good. Okay.
What is the standard for visibility from the road for the parking lot?
So all parking has to be in the third lot layer. And so the under chapter 13, there are the first layer, second layer, and then third lot layer. And essentially the standards are that parking has to be fully screened, it has to be behind lots, except for on-street parking that's required as a part of the thoroughfare standard. Any other parking needs to be essentially in the back of the lots. No parking area can have an access area on a thoroughfare greater than 70 feet. And so this parking lot, this parking lot, all conform. And of course, this is future. This
What's the
is
70-foot rule? I'm sorry.
yeah. So if
Greater than 70 feet measured now.
and then actually it's less than that. Let me find the rule here. Third lot layer, all fuel pumps, parking, fuel pumps. Driveways at frontages shall be no wider than 24 feet in the first lot layer. So there is a 24-foot wide drive in the first lot layer. So that's as wide as you can have access to a parking lot
Okay.
and so this is the first layer. So 24 feet is the limit, and we certainly meet it with the other access points here. So, drive-through shall be screened from the frontage by a building or streetscape, except for an access driveway. And so certainly we're gonna have structures fully screening this parking area and the other parking areas in the future as proposed.
Again, some of the criteria will be handled when there's actually a proposal for the lot. And if it's administratively approved, then basically it sort of sits with me to make sure it meets all those standards. That it's conditional, end up being in front of the board for review. If they got to change the lot lines for use, it'll be in front of you. So those are the checks and balances.
What if they don't build out?
What do you mean?
What if those commercial lots don't develop for 10 years? Or if they never get sold and built? Are we gonna end up with just a view of a parking lot there?
We've got a street tree here.
I know where you're gonna be standing.
I mean,
I can see it'll be
Or
blocked if it builds, but maybe
maybe-
it doesn't build for 10 years. Do we
well,
just look
maybe,
straight
maybe
into
the owner's
parking
got to figure out a pricing scheme that works. So
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
lot? Uh-huh.
But the regulations don't talk of having buildings. I mean, we look, we have these lots here that's, that haven't been, built out yet. So,
Yeah, okay.
so. I understand the concept and the concern. The downside is the regulations, you know.
And I can tell you that the owner's goal is to get these lots sold and developed as soon as possible. Okay,
He'll make you a good deal the first one.
Yeah.
all right, so looking now at the block perimeter, we talked about that. We talked about the civic space, and how civic space is dealt with in the rules, and that this particular parcel is bigger than the minimum size for civic space. Staff has recommended we talk a little bit about the streets again under this plan, but again, all of these street assemblies are right out of chapter 13 in terms of the green belt, the sidewalk, where the trees are planted, where the lights are located. All of it is essentially dictated under chapter 13, and all of this geometry that you see here meets that requirement. The alleys are referred to as opportunistic alleys, and so they're also multi-use. So bicyclists, pedestrians, and vehicles can utilize those pathways that are behind the parcels as shown.
From a circulation standpoint on the alleys, are those being conceived as being one way?
No,
Or not?
so
No.
the folks who develop your standards
Yeah,
have created this assembly that's called an opportunistic alley. And so it's not limited in one-way direction. It's set up because the anticipation is, as they've explained it to me, that the traffic will be so light on them that it would be treated like a driveway, and you're gonna drive in or drive out, and the odds of you being in conflict with another vehicle are slim. And if there are, you're gonna pull over and make accommodations and pass one another. So they are specifically meant to be, and that's hence the term opportunistic, that you would drive in any direction on them in either way.
thanks.
All right. Yeah, and so in terms of recommended conditions, obviously, we talked about the stairs on this side of the building, just to add them to complete the porch, private frontage. The condition about setting some time more than 180 days so we can get our state permits. And then, of course, the discussion of the lot itself in terms of whether you'd like to do a waiver on top of what the rules say for an existing structure. So I think those are the high points of staff's comments. Any questions that we can delve into?
Yeah, a question. Can you speak to phasing as it relates to construction access on the site and what's been discussed on that front? I mean, just looking at what you proposed and the amount of development that's going to be in the core, once all of this is developed, let's just say it's all built out, the next phase is approved, where are construction vehicles going to be coming in and out? And just thinking about the concerns that were just raised by the town of Underhill, is this now going to put, burden on, let's say, a Park Street access for construction vehicles versus being able to access through the town of Jericho, because this has already been completed with no thoroughfares to get through. I'm just curious what the thoughts have been regarding construction access.
So there's a couple of things. One of the pieces that we've designed is in phase 1, we're going to build out these intersections so that when we come in phase 2, we don't have a curve that ends here and we have to pick up and go ahead. And which is why, another reason why we've included this in phase 1, so that traffic can circulate and not have a dead end here and a dead end here, even though we aren't gonna have access to these frontages. But in terms of access through the site, until these lots are developed, there's access here essentially that, and if you've been to the site, you know that it's deep, well-drained gravel. And this whole area is essentially one big gravel open yard where the logs were stored. So access here or another location to kind of work around this area shouldn't be an issue for future construction. And all the real core heavy duty water, sewer, stormwater work will have been completed. And so we're talking about roads, road construction, sidewalk construction, which should be fairly straightforward in the future. And then as the construction backs out, probably the very last thing that will be built will be the alleyways behind the lots. And at this point, this is phase one. There could be phase 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, or it could all be in phase 2. And that's just a crystal ball that we haven't really looked into that far yet. We're just trying to get through phase 1. But in terms of construction traffic, there'll certainly be access points. This curb cut right now, next to the church, is a permitted curb cut from V-Trans. So, and it's all gravel and could remain gravel, and all the construction traffic could travel here. Certainly suitable, and has seen certainly heavy traffic from sawmill activities and others over the years. So we think there's certainly ways of doing that without creating issues for the neighbors during construction of the next phases.
If this were to be approved, could you live with a condition that basically all construction access would be through Jericho until you've received Underhill review and approval?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I would take care of that. Ensuring that gives Underhill the protection.
Yep.
So it doesn't have that impact.
Yep, that would be certainly fine.
Would you be amenable to a requirement for a charging station in the parking area?
So I'm sure that in the Act 250 review process will be required. I know that when we did the bank, we were required to provide accommodations for the future. So to run the conduit, make sure that got inside. So that in the future, if a charging station was desired, one could be installed. So
there is a charging station there now.
There's that one long station sitting there.
It looks like it's easy to access when needed.
So I'm sure in the end, we'll be looking for one again at the Act 250 level. But if you wanted to have a condition that this parking lot have 2 charging stations, that would probably be certainly acceptable. When we did our power calculations so one of the things that we had to do for remount power was to predict how much power usage that we were going to require. And that was one of the questions from remount power in terms of residential panels. And so they recommended that all the residential panels be at least 100 amp. And if they had a 100 amp panel, would be able to accommodate chargers. So that will be available for the residential lots beyond this bigger parking area.
One question, is 100 amps big enough to handle heat pumps as opposed to furnaces?
When we had a long conversation with the Green Mountain Power folks on several occasions, and said, look, given what's out in the future, what should we be planning for? And they felt, given the size of the lots and the houses that would go on these lots, that 100 amp was adequate. So we relied on their input for that.
Okay. Any more questions from the board? Yeah.
I just,
Any questions, Chris?
yeah, if you can just overview, again, you've hit on the pedestrian, but pedestrian and bike, I mean, they're kind of, how is that being addressed?
All right, so obviously we've got the connectivity behind all the lots. That will be very low, slow traffic, consider it like a driveway. So you could walk, you could ride your bike. The thoroughfares under chapter 13, essentially, for this area, show that it's essentially share the road, development with regard to riding on the streets. And again, the sidewalks are 6 feet wide. So if you had a young bike rider, that needed to get from point A to point B and weren't riding in the alleyways, the sidewalks are quite wide. But other than that, the plan under chapter 13 for these thoroughfares that are directed for here is that the bicycles share the road within the development.
Thank you.
Anything else, Chris?
No, thank you.
Go ahead and open it to public questions, public comment. Steve?
Questions. Two questions. One, could you confirm?
Actually, state your name, that way they
Then
get
ask
it.
the questions to the board.
Okay, thank you. Steve Matera. Could you confirm again, sizing of the parking in relation to the apartments? How many units? How many spaces per unit?
Just ask us the question.
Okay. And then,
Get your answer. Yeah.
thank you. And then the second question was, is there any consideration around the ownership model for that apartment, for the mill building itself, within the context of the homeowner association? And what I'm asking is, down the road, could someone choose to try and convert that into condominiums? And is there anything that the town would want to know about that? Thank you.
Any other? Susan?
Hi, I'm Susan Brzee. It was a great presentation. I learned a lot. Really excited about the development. Really excited to see it progressing. I have a couple of questions, mostly around the pedestrian safety and experience. I don't really expect my questions to be answered tonight. I'm more posing them, assuming that the DRB would consider the questions as you go through your deliberations. So my first question, Jeff, you asked, which was the intended pedestrian connection to the market. My second question has to do with the size of the lot and the size of the building and the waiver, or my second group of questions. And I had a hard time understanding the plat because it showed a single lot containing the mill building and the parking lot. And I understand the regulation, which was discussed tonight, that the building is grandfathered because the building exceeds 70 feet, and that there were staff notes that the lot coverage and the dimensions exceed some of the requirements, and so there would be a question of a waiver, and you discussed that tonight. And I'm trying to differentiate between an existing building, which potentially is covered by the grandfathering of the regulation, versus the choice of the applicant to draw a lot, which is lines on a piece of paper and are not derived necessarily from the existing building. And so, my assumption is that for whatever reason, the building and the lot are combined and not separated. If they were separated, the building would have its characteristics and the lot would have different characteristics. But right now, from my reading of the plot, they're together. So that leads me to look at the legal documents which describe the parking area as a common element, which can be accessed by everyone, and the mill building, which is described as a condominium legal entity, which is not a common element. And so my question is are the legal documents clear if the lot is in fact shared by a common element and a private element, how that entire lot is owned, how it could develop over time, how it's maintained, how those expenses are shared? Because the legal document says one thing about common stuff and a different thing about private stuff. So that's the question is it clear? The second question about the lot is the lot being reviewed as a principal use or as an accessory use? And it seems like the regulations say you can have multiple principal uses on a lot, like you can have the building and you can have parking, that would be fine, but they're different. And I wanted to know if the DRB would explicitly approve the parking as an accessory use or as a principal use, because down the road that might make a difference. And my basic question there is if it makes the most sense, since we have a non-conforming structure, to have the lot as big as it is, which it sort of exacerbates the non-conformance. Whereas if the lot were if the parking area were on its own lot, could that lot containing the parking comply with the dimensional requirements? The next set of questions is the staff notes mention that the mill building and the parking lot.
So I'm just gonna interrupt just for,
Okay,
she's referencing what I handed out.
Yeah.
To you, so you, so.
right.
So that you follow it. Thank you.
And it's helpful that we had the presentation, because I think a lot of some of these questions were answered. If you determine that the lot and the building will in fact stay one big lot, and that the parking lot needs to be 75 spaces, given the amount of street parking that is also available. So when we went through the numbers, several of the lots were cited as single-family residences, whereas on the conceptual plan that was presented several months ago, some of those lots were presented as mixed-use lots. So the fact that they're single-family residents, then does that also assume no garages? They did mention about parking in a driveway or on the lot itself, but when we went through the calculation about 75 spaces, there was, I didn't totally get the calculation taking into account all of the parking that might occur on the individual lots, as well as all the parking that can occur on the street, because my basic takeaway was, wow, that's a really big parking lot. So if you determine that a waiver is required in order to approve the lot at this dimension, whether it's shared or if you decide to have the parking be separate, because the waiver allows you to mitigate impacts of granting a waiver, my question would be, would the DRB consider requiring the parking area to include a pathway that bisects the lot for pedestrians? Because the whole driver of having lot sizes and block perimeters and frontages and porches is for the pedestrian experience. And so when I see the lot, I imagine myself just basically snaking through blank pavement. And so that would mitigate the impacts to pedestrians of granting a waiver to allow a width of a lot that's greater. Would you consider requiring the parking area to add landscaping within the interior of the lot to break up the pavement itself? And it was great to hear that a big function of the lot is below grade stormwater infiltration. But still the lot itself is sort of a mass of pavement as a way to mitigate the impact of granting the waiver, because again, if the lot were required to meet the dimensions, it would be smaller lots, more of them like the other ones in the development. And then my next question is similar to Jeff's, which is that because the parking area will dominate the parcel for years, is it possible to build out the parking in phases to coincide with the uses and the development, which I understand is inconvenient and I understand is more expensive. But on the other hand, if you think about Burlington and City Place and having a hole in the ground, we don't want to wind up with just a big parking lot there for a long time. And that the waiver gives us the ability to ask about how to make the impact of granting the waiver as minimal as possible. So those are my questions. I loved what I heard tonight, and especially about the alleys and the circulation and the thoughtfulness of the application. I just really wish that parking lot didn't have to be so big and that it could potentially be integrated better into the site and phased over time.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Questions?
We do have a person remotely with a question. So Amy, I'm going to
Can you hear me?
oh, yeah, now I can hear you, Amy.
This is not Amy. This is Amy's husband, Peter. Peter Booth, Jericho resident who lives right near Riverside. My question is about the timing. I'm not sure if that can be answered now or if that's outside the scope of what's being discussed, but I'm wondering about what the anticipated timing is for Act 250 and all the permitting. And then if it all magically happened right now and everything were approved, what's the time from when permitting is completed to breaking ground in terms of roads in the parking lot and then hopefully people buying lots?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Any other public comment, questions? Okay, if not, can we go back to Steve's question then, and let's just talk about the ownership model for the mill building. Are those apartments or condominiums?
So the legal documents before you show that them to be potentially condominium units. It could be that all of the condominium units are owned by one owner and rented. It could be that the condominium units are sold off individually. That's still a decision that the developer is working on, but created documents so that there was flexibility for either model. The way that legal documents are set up, it describes the rights and as if each unit was an individual owner. So to describe those rights, and it might be that 8 units are owned by the same owner and has 8 shares of that requirement in terms of cost sharing, for example.
Okay, thank you. And
His other part of the question was, does the town care? The town, we don't get into the ownership issue.
okay. And the other question about, I guess we should go over again, that came up twice, was the parking calculation.
So again, with the assumption that of residential use here, 10 units here, and then these parcels and this building being not residential, we with at 4 per thousand for the non-residential use and 1 per unit for the residential portion, we're at about a requirement of about 70-ish, 75 spaces, which is what we have here. So we're under the current rules, the way they were most recently modified. So the old rules were 3 per thousand per non-residential and 1.5 per residential. But anyway, under the current rules, that space, these spaces handle the required parking that's listed in chapter 13.
Then you're not assuming anybody builds a garage and parks there, or?
Well, so there is a possibility that, say on this parcel, maybe this parcel, perhaps this one, that there could be on-site parking. But if there is, so there's 3 units that would come out of the parking lot now. Right now, there's no elbow room in here for a visitor, for example, if I'm coming to visit, or if I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment and we have 2 cars, there's no accommodation for that second vehicle. You're going to be parking on the street somewhere. So based on the current standards, we think this is close. In fact, again, you're going to end up with people parking on the street if you come to visit, or if there's more than 1 vehicle owned in a unit.
Does the on-street parking not count towards that? Because you have the parking all the way around.
So on-street parking can count as long as it's within 200 feet of the use. So you'd be within 200 feet of potentially this building. That space could count against the total count. But I would suggest that now that you're at 1 per residence, that's the absolute minimum. And so we're showing essentially the absolute minimum in that parking field, and knowing that there's going to be demand beyond that for in phase 1.
Okay, thank you. And let's skip with Peter's question about the timing, and 2 questions on timing. When do you think you'll start selling lots, and when do you start thinking you'll actually start construction?
So
It's kind of just
I'm sure I can,
information.
I'm sure I can answer this for the owner, which is as soon as possible. So I mean, right now, as you know, the mill has been renovated and preserved. I mean, if it had been left in the condition it was found, there would be probably little left at this point. So a lot of money has been spent to maintain it and to renovate, and then to replace all the windows that have been vandalized. So there's been quite a lot of money that's been expended, and I'm sure he would like to see a return on that as soon as possible. So
The reality is Rick's kind of answered the review requirement with regards to Act 250 and things. You know, they're 12 to 16 months out before that is complete, and then that would lead to shovel the ground. And being a Burlington resident, I would contend the existing property looks more like the hole in the ground in Burlington now than it would after an approval and development.
That's hopefully no appeals either, right, for the applicant?
Yep.
No.
And that's why I say that, I mean, it's very difficult to predict the permit process. It could go very quickly.
Yeah.
We hope it will. But plan for the worst, hope for the best. So.
Okay, thank you. And can we look at the lots again? Just show people the lots lines for particularly the lot that includes
Plat?
Susan, the Plat, right? That was showing the mill building and the parking being one lot.
So if you. And the legal documents describe 2 different things. One is the mill building condominium declaration, and then the second set of documents is the mill yard declaration. And those declarations overlap when it comes to the use of the parking lot, in terms of which lots get to use those spaces. So this area falls into the description of the legal documents for both this development and then the remainder of the development in terms of who can use this lot. But this lot, we'll just trace around the outline here. It's here. And then down, out, and then back around the sawmill building and back to this point.
And the frontage or the first layer of this lot is in this area.
Correct,
The
yes.
second area and then the third. So basically there are some different,
The first lot layer, second lot layer, third lot layer, which is where parking needs to be,
right?
if it's not on the street.
And the primary for the first lot layer really deals with the frontage and those types of requirements.
Why was the parking lot kept? Why wasn't the parking lot made into a separate lot?
Partly ownership control in terms of development of this building. And to ensure that this piece, and if we were to look at the stormwater plans, you'll see the stormwater gallery takes up probably that much of the parking lot. And so, in order to retain control in terms of construction, this key element, which actually takes care of stormwater for a large section of the project, it was decided to keep this and the sawdust building all as one unit to start with. If it was divided, if this was a separate parcel, in terms of the chapter 13 regulations, there would be no difference in terms of how this was addressed. Because it would still be within the third lot layer, first lot, second lot, third lot layer, it would be behind third lot layer for this lot and these lots. So it would still comply. But it would still it would look the same. The only difference would be how the declaration then would describe this as a different parcel than the declarations describe it now.
If the parking area were on its own lot, wouldn't that require it to have a thoroughfare or some sort of frontage?
No,
Okay, it gets a,
yeah, no, so
no is a good answer, but I understand what no means. And
yeah, we'll leave it there. Yeah,
Yeah.
that gets us into a very complicated
yeah,
topic that we've discussed before.
thank you.
Chris, I wasn't on the board when this went through preliminary. Is this any changes to that?
There's been some
pretty much
slight
the same proposal?
There's,
Just that.
yeah, I was gonna say that's,
No, but as far as the parking in the mill,
no,
that's what, just nothing's changed for the.
No.
Nothing substantial.
no,
Yep.
no. There's been obviously more information and details and refinement of design, but nothing substantial. I think is,
Same, yes,
Yeah.
yep.
Any other questions from the board?
No, no.
Okay. Then
No.
anything else, Rick?
If you have no more questions, I think we've covered a lot of ground and I appreciate your patience.
Appreciate everybody's patience. It's been a long meeting.
There's a lot to digest here, so.
But thank you for presenting it in a totally understandable way.
Okay, we'll close this portion. We have one more item, which is to approve the minutes from November 10th, January 10th.
I will move that the minutes be approved.
I'll second that one.
Andrew, you seconding it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
we need a vote.
all in favor?
Aye.
Approving the minutes? Great, thank you.
I'm gonna stop the,
Stop the meeting.